Hey guys, welcome to lesson 2 for this week, hour 2 if you will. So what we're going to look at today, we're going to move on a little from, we've looked at the silent era a bit more specifically. We're going to try and incorporate elements of modernism today, so look at that wider kind of social movement of modernism, and then kind of move into German Expressionism a little bit. The first thing I want you to do is a little task. So you should now have watched those 3 little clips, those video links I put at the end of last lesson. I want us to focus a little bit on Unchained Andalou, or I want you to focus a little bit on Unchained Andalou. And I'd like you to just now spend 10 minutes or so and write down what you thought of that film. So what did it communicate to you? How did it do it visually, through silence and through silent cinema, okay? So how is it using cinematography and editing? How's it using mise-en-scène and performance? What did you make of it? What did you think of it? Did you hate it? Did you love it? Was it strange? If so, why? What do you think it was trying to say? Write me a page, okay? Let's take 10-15 minutes, write me a page, really interested to kind of see what you think about Unchained Andalou, and then we'll crack on from there. Thanks guys, back in 15 minutes. Okay, welcome back. Thank you for getting your thoughts down on Unchained Andalou. What I want to do now is move on a little bit to kind of place the silent era of cinema into kind of a broader social, political, cultural context, okay? And the context really, as a catch-all term, the context really for this we would refer to as modernism as a movement, okay? So modernism is what we're going to look at for the next bit of this lesson. So if you could just go in the PowerPoint to slide 9, we're going to go through slides 9 and 10 together now. So I'll talk through them, have the PowerPoint up, and then you can make your additional notes, okay? So let's start with slide 9 of modernism. So I've got my PowerPoint here as well, so it's the same PowerPoint that you've got, so that's why I'm glancing down there, if you're wondering why. So let's start with that first little bit. So as the West struggled to make sense of the political and the social aftermath of the World War, many cinema artists, many directors, producers continued to kind of push the boundaries of what was possible in this still emerging art form. So you've got to remember that cinema is just a little baby. It's only been here very, very briefly. And it's only just started, it's only just emerging. And the World War was such a catastrophic event for most countries, a seismic shift in the way that people thought. You know, after the First World War was such a catastrophe that almost everybody, all of the thinkers, all of the leaders across the Western world pretty much were back at square one. We need to do things differently. We have to do things differently. If how we have done things so far has led us to this absolute catastrophe, we need to start again, okay? And that's what really modernism was. And cinema had just emerged, really, just before the First World War had broken out. And so now it was time to push further. And that's what cinema artists were doing in this kind of like tumultuous aftermath, politically and socially, from the World War. So in the 20s, there was a number of different kind of cinematic or film movements that emerged out of this tumultuous period, combined with this desire to push the boundaries, and it all mixed together, and these movements emerged out of cinema, okay? There's many of them, but the 3 most prominent, you would say, in the 20s to emerge, really, were German Expressionism, Soviet montage, and physical silent comedy, okay? So German Expressionism, we're just going to hold that thought because that's our focus for this entire topic, and we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the lesson, okay? Soviet montage, we briefly mentioned last lesson when we looked at Man with a Movie Camera, the idea of intellectual montage, seemingly random, chaotic imagery that's kind of like forced together in order to form a kind of ideological whole, when you look at it all together, sequences in the film and all of these images and ideas, they kind of form together in a coherent way, and that's what Soviet montage was. So things like people like Eisenstein were the forerunners of this movement in Russia, and it's just so important, such an important thing to look at. So do go and find Man with a Movie Camera. Do go and find Strike. These are incredible films, and a lot of our editing, a lot of our fragmented editing techniques, the fragmented editing techniques that we still use today, that we've been studying, parallel editing and montage editing, fragmented editing, they come from Soviet montage in the 20s. So that was that movement. And then physical silent comedy, which was a predominantly American movement. We had the physical silent comedians, and we discussed those last lesson. People like Charlie Chaplin, people like Harold Lloyd, and for me personally, the most important of them all, people like Buster Keaton. Okay, so those three comedians, and there were many others obviously as well. They ushered in this new era of visual communication, where they were using the camera as a way to communicate comedy, to make people laugh, and they were using the camera in increasingly radical and inventive ways. Okay, so slide 10. Let's move on to slide 10. If you're following along, and we'll kind of go through some of the stuff here. So let's add a little bit more to this. Okay, so first point: each of these movements, so physical silent American comedy, Soviet montage, German expressionism, okay? Each of these cinematic movements are propelled forward by and concerned with the wider cultural and philosophical movement of modernism. So all of those three, and many of the other kind of cinematic or art movements at this time, are propelled forward by the general concept of modernism, okay? Modernism was a belief that traditional forms of art, traditional forms of literature, traditional forms of religious belief and social organisation and order were increasingly outdated, that it was time to kind of like scrap all of them and start again with a new way of thinking, okay? Cities developed, industry developed, industrial societies were developing all along at this point, and it was believed that a way to deal with all of this emerging technology, so all of these possibilities were opening up with this new technology that was emerging all the time. So we talked about this fertile creative explosion. A lot of that was driven by this new technology, machinery, just emerging out of everywhere in all guises. But also it was a way to deal with the past horror of the war. As we said before, it changed everyone's attitude, everyone's way of thinking. Everything had collapsed. It was time to rebuild. So the catastrophe of the war, emerging technology, we need something new, and maybe this technology can help us get there to this new place. We had to embrace new ways of doing things. This was now the modern world. And it was very much a seismic shift in belief and attitude. This is the modern world now. We must embrace it with both hands. No looking backward, no holding back, push forward, use technology and machinery to do so. Okay? So there was a renewed, well, not even a renewed, it had never really been there before, there was a commitment, a new commitment to technology and to machinery as a kind of progressive force. Okay, a force for good, to lead us out of the kind of catastrophic hole that Western civilization found itself in after the First World War. Okay, so it was about creating a bold new way of life, the modern world as we know it. The modern world was emerging and about to emerge. Okay, so part of this embracing of new machinery was also the embracing of the new machinery of cinema. Okay. Pushing to understand what was possible in this new art form, because it was so exciting. What can we do? We've got all this machinery. What can we do to push the boundaries of this art form with the machinery that we have? A new way of thinking. So it's important for us to note that the films of this movement in German expressionism and Soviet montage and physical silent comedy, they weren't just concerned with modernism as a theme, although they were. Okay, so the films were often about what was going on socially, politically, culturally in terms of this new modern world. But they were also the filmmakers themselves were part of this modernist movement. They were artists embracing the modernist movement. They were using new camera machinery and technology. They were using new editing machinery and technology, new special effects machinery and technology to push the medium of cinema forward as part of this modernist experiment. And the films themselves were also part of this too. We would often have films where the characters were dealing with the new onset of the modern world and all the changes that were going on around them. Okay, so to kind of tie this together and just for us to watch, I just want you to go to slide 11. And I've included a sequence here from the film Modern Times by Charlie Chaplin. So you can see this is a perfect example of a filmmaker who is thematically dealing with this new kind of like cultural change of modernism that's happening. But he's also a modernist himself. Charlie Chaplin is a modernist because he's a director, a filmmaker, an artist who is using technology to push the boundaries of cinema. And I think this sequence is a great mixture of those two ideas of how it's thematically about modernism, but also a part of modernism itself using new technology. So in that YouTube clip there, if you just want to go to about 1 minute 21 in, it's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. It remains that. It's just incredible. And just enjoy it and watch it and try and think about everything we've just been talking about in terms of modernism. And I'll see you back here in 10 minutes or so when you're done. Cheers, guys. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed that. It is tremendous. Chaplin was beyond the genius, really. And it's just a wonderful mixture together of all of those different modernist things that we've been talking about. It was such an incredible movement, okay? An incredible movement, changed the world, the modern world that we live in, okay? Is started there, essentially. So let's move now to look at German Expressionism as a kind of part of this, an essential, integral part of the modernist movement. Okay, so you can see on slide 12 there, German Expressionism. That's an image from the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, okay, which is one of the key German Expressionist works. And just look at that beautiful image. Look at the set design. Look at those angles and the shadows and the light and the placement of the figures. Just beautiful imagery and quite brutalist as well. So let's move onto slide 13 and you'll see a question there. So the question is, do you know any German Expressionist films? And you should do because you've done a little work on this over the half term. So I just want you to take 2 minutes and maybe don't even look at your notes. Can you remember the names? Have you even seen any German Expressionist films? So just write down a few and then we'll crack on after that. Thanks, guys. Okay, so this is the last thing we're going to do today in today's session. We're just going to kind of like talk through some of the key examples and just going to show you some images of them. So if you could just go to slide 14, okay, I'm going to talk you through some of these examples. So starting in the top left there, we've got obviously Nosferatu, directed by F.W. Murnau, who we are looking at. Just an incredible example of Gothic horror, but also of German Expressionist. Arguably, maybe the first key German Expressionist film. Just absolutely fantastic movie, and its use of shadows in its iconic sequence of him kind of creeping up the stairs is really key to understanding the aesthetics of German Expressionism. Next to that, we've got Fritz Lang's M, which again is a absolutely incredible film, and that's a famous image of that, the reflection of him looking back at himself with the M sign on him and what that means. We've got films like The Testament of Dr. Mabuse, which is an incredibly kind of famous film. There underneath on the second row we've got the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and I mean hopefully even just looking at that famous image of Caligari, you can see how this links to all Gothic horror, to the work of Tim Burton, to Edward Scissorhands and Batman Returns, and all of these different things. Next to that we've got the Hands of Orlac. Okay, Hands of Orlac is really, so Hands of Orlac, the guy with the hands like this, and again Nosferatu like that as well, and Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is about a kind of doctor who kind of like manipulates and hypnotizes this kind of person to carry out his evil deeds for him. Testament of Dr. Mabuse is also about a kind of like a evil hypnotist, manipulative figure. So the Hands of Orlac again are about a man who doesn't have control over his own hands, whose hands are kind of possessed and are doing committing actions on his behalf that he's not responsible for. Now, isn't that interesting? Okay, that out of Germany, after the First World War, we have a series of films that are about kind of weaker male individuals who are being controlled and manipulated by more powerful forces that they don't fully understand, and they're being manipulated to commit acts of atrocity. And there's something incredibly profound and deeply psychologically complex about these films. They're very much about the idea that a vast swathe of the population had been manipulated, cajoled and pushed into taking part in the committing of atrocities in the First World War that they were finding it very, very difficult to comprehend and deal with in the aftermath. So German Expressionism is really rooted in a sense of paranoia and fear and tremendous guilt at what had happened in the world on their behalf. On the last row underneath that we've got Faust, which contains an incredible opening sequence where the devil literally appears over a German city. Again, doesn't take a genius to figure out what the ideology here is, what might be being communicated here. Okay, we've got Metropolis, which is again about the overthrowing of capitalist powerful figures, and then we've got that incredible kind of image there from Morn to Midnight as well. So these are some of our key German Expressionist films, and so depending on where you're up to, this is the end of the session. What I'd ask you to do, go and find some, go and watch some, okay? There's loads on YouTube. You can find some on Amazon Prime, which has a decent selection. Again, the BFI player, if you signed up for that 14-day free trial, get hold of some, watch them, even if it's just clips on YouTube, and kind of immerse yourself in that cinematic movement. Go back over these notes, go back over modernism, that push, that emergence of new machinery and technology, and the embracing of it with both hands by artists to make a new modern world, to scrap the old ways of doing things, the old ways of thinking, all religious ideas, to embrace science, to embrace technology, to embrace fact, to embrace technology. It's the modern world. It was a real push to do that. Start again. Focus on fact and machinery and science and technology, and cinema, and specifically German Expressionism, was a real part of that movement. And we'll crack on from there next lesson. Thanks, guys.